Hello, everybody. Hello again. I think we've seen some of you this morning during the session of success stories of Saudi young entrepreneurs. Basically, this session, as the title says, it's going to be focused on employability, synergizing the job creation and employment in the Saudi Arabia. And this is a very, very hot subject, and we have a good panel to discuss different issues. We have a lot of things to talk about. The labor market, where it stands right now, the education system, how does it have to be flexible enough to meet the gap that we have in the labor market. Joining me in this discussion, the Minister of Labor, Mr. Adil Al-Faqih, obviously an ex-businessman, and he's been doing this job for the last 2 years, and he's been on the front pages for the last 2 years, especially when he popped up the number that he actually employed more than 750,000 Saudi people lately, or for the past 2 years. We have also Philip Andrew, Group Chief Executive for Working Links. He's been doing this job for the last 10 years, and what they do is that they try to link major stakeholders, education, private sectors, and the government to actually know exactly what the labor market needs. We have also Douglas Becker, founder, chairman, and CEO. He's the founder of this company, and he's been doing education, working with the government institution for the past 10 years. Ladies, I should have introduced Dalia first. Dalia Khalifa, she's the regional head, the E4E initiative for Arab youth. She's an investment banker. She's been with the World Bank for 10 years, and she's been doing or heading E4E for the past 2.5 years. And last but not least, we have Ali Matar, the head of LinkedIn Middle East, or MENA region, Middle East and North Africa. We're going to start this session by listening to a brief presentation that the Minister of Labor of Saudi Arabia will be conducting now, telling us exactly where the labor markets in Saudi Arabia stands and what are the achievements so far for the past 2 years. Your Excellency, if you can come and start your presentation.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم علمنا الذي ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا فضلك علما. Your Highnesses, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm pleased to be with you this year. And I was here about 2 years ago. I was invited by Global Competitiveness Council to share at that time the plans for the Ministry of Labor for the labor market in Saudi Arabia. I was not able to handle most of the journalists' questions at that time, and I hope they are here so that they can ask me again this time. I'm pleased that we have more concrete results of our plans. At that time, we have had the first program launched, Nitaqat, our first program launched for only 6 months. I have a couple of slides that I want to share with you first about what took place over the last couple of years, and then I will move immediately to the, I have them there, okay, so then I will move to the subject of our topic today, which is synergizing job creation and education. It's about 30 months since we launched Nitaqat, and at this point of time, the employment in the private sector is about 1.5 million. This is 101% more than what it was 30 months ago, which means we have now in the private sector employed over the last 30 months more than what we have employed over the previous 30 years in Saudi Arabia. The nationalization rate grew up from 7.6% to 15.2%, and it was not only quantities, but it was quality too, because at that time, about 51% of the total employed in the Saudi market earned less than 33,000 riyal. Now over 93% earn 3,000 riyal or more per month. Actually, I'm moving now to the subject that we want to talk about today. There are concerns and questions that are being raised all the time by the employers about the appropriateness of the educational outcomes of the graduates of our schools, of our universities, and the appropriateness of those in terms of the skills and in terms of the qualification they have to the market needs. We have tried to solve this problem or address this problem by trying to work on building what we call the National Labor Observatory. The National Labor Observatory, منصة سوق العمل, is the entity that tries to track information and publish it. And we started by looking at, I'm going to share with you a couple of indicators that we believe is relevant and important. And I'm talking here about the graduates of our TVTC colleges. The Minister of Labor happens to be the chairman of the Technical Vocational Training Corporation in Saudi Arabia. And we have about 100 colleges and industrial institutes that graduates tens of thousands of students. We have looked at the last 5 years. We have found now pre-nitaqat, it took about on average 13 months for a graduate of TVTC colleges to find a job. Now it takes him about 5 months. The information, what is important about it is not this. Actually, what is important is that we need to zoom down and drill into which one of these specialization of these qualifications that probably took about a year and a half, where others probably got employed in the first 2 months. This is the average. And sharing this information with its details to both the policymakers on the one hand and the applicants to the colleges would help both groups make the right decisions. Because if I'm an applicant, I'm a high school graduate, and I join or approach one of these colleges and find that this specific specialization, if I get qualified and certified with this diploma, it will take me a year or a half or 2 years to find a job. Probably I'll change my mind and go and find something else. Whereas if I find that the graduates of this specialization or qualification takes him or her only a couple of months to find a job, then if you can see that the waiting time has been reducing from 406 days to 138 days in the last. But what is relevant to this discussion today is that we need to publish this information not only for those colleges, not at the college level, but at the specialization level, at the university level, and at all forms of graduations and all forms of certification. Because this feedback mechanism is going to make it easy for the graduates and for the policymakers to make the right decisions about what to do next. The second point that I would like to share with you is that we have started a new intervention as well at the TVTC front, and that is developing public-private partnerships with training providers, with international training providers. The concept and this type of transaction that we are doing with the providers, what is different from the classical type of engagements with outsourcing is that we are making the responsibility is on the private sector operator of the college. So they will get paid partly for when those students go to the classes and those trainees get trained, but they get paid more when they graduate and pass a test that we conduct. And they really make money only when they help those graduates get employed. By this, we mean that now the training provider is responsible for listening to the market, understanding what the employer wants, fine-tuning and changing and tweaking the curricula, the programs, the interventions to make sure that the graduates of these programs are going to find the jobs. The point I'm trying to say here is that I believe that synergizing job creation and education comes if we put the thing in the hands of private operators, if we provide them the information, if we have the incentives and the profits and the money linked to their ability to graduate trainees or graduates who will get a job within a reasonable period of time. I believe that these two key tracks, publishing information and building systems that combine profitability to achievements that we want in terms of employment, I believe these two tracks will help improve the synergy between job education and the employability and the labor market needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's start from the bottom and then we'll go up. I think we should ask the question, how many employers or potential employers we have in the audience? Because that's what we're missing in the panel, really. Quite a lot.
Well, too.
Very good. Okay. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Faqih. There is a big complaint from the employer side that they're saying we're ready to take nitaqat into perspective. We actually had cost pressure and we're trying to live with it for the past 2 years as long as the results are very good. But they are saying also that we are pushed to employ a Saudi national, and we are taking the risk that the Saudi national is not productive enough. And this is a problem, because if he's not productive or she's not productive, the employer is pushed to actually go and hire a foreigner to do the job. So double cost for the company. What message would you actually say to the employer? How much responsibility do they hold, and how much responsibility you hold with education, with whatever is out there for them?
Let me say that I agree and disagree. On one hand, I disagree with this conclusion because most of those employers are Saudis. And I claim that we do not have genetic deformation that makes us incapable of working, generally speaking. I claim that most of the Saudi businessmen who have worked and who are making the employer community here are graduates of our education system. So our education system is not always producing very low quality products. And the evidence is not my statement. The evidence is the quality of employers that we have and we engage with every day, who are the outcome of our education system. Having said that, yes, clap please. Having said that, we have to as well be fair and recognize that there are opportunities for improvement, and these opportunities are being worked on by our colleagues in the different departments of the government. We've just had a presentation by His Excellency Dr. Septi stating what the interventions that are being done by the Ministry of Education in this direction. I've talked a little bit just now about how we are engaging international high-quality training providers to come and bring the best education in the world to the market. But I claim as well that most and many of those who learned the best practices in this country have learned it in the private sector. The private sector has a role to do a lot of on-the-job training. They have actually many of the people that I recall when in my previous incarnation, I was an employer, and I did look more at where the employees has worked before, more than which university they graduated from. And those who have worked in good high-class, world-class companies have that work experience on its own had been always a significant evidence of them acquiring knowledge. And so there is a lot of opportunity for the private sector, instead of really sitting and watching us struggle with this, to partner with us in producing opportunities for our youth to develop their skills and improve their skills. And that's part of the...
Are they doing enough?
I cannot generalize. I think there are many that are doing excellent work, and many that have absorbed a lot of the Saudi youth who have not had the good educational background, have had problems, and spent hours and money and effort to convert them to high quality, productive people, and others who are still sitting on the side trying to find ways to bypass the system and work on the side and just to comply rather than participate and become active partners with us.
Dalia, how can the private sector take the lead in this?
I think the minister's point...
Sorry, Dalia.
Oh, Dalia.
Sorry.
That's okay. No, thank you very much. That's a very important question, and it has many parts. It's not a very simple response, because the private sector in terms of employment has many roles, both as the provider and creator of the jobs, but also in creating the enabling environment in partnership with education providers to make sure that those who are coming into the job market have, in fact, the skills that are required to take up those jobs. And so the answer is seriously multi-part. You know, we're talking here in a conference about competitiveness. And we heard this morning a lot of elements of competitiveness, you know, regulatory environments, investments, laws, regulations, and so on. It's funny, in my previous life before coming at the World Bank Group, before coming to this job, I was responsible for the doing business report. And a lot of what Saudi Arabia is now doing, focusing on competitiveness, is talking to how it was able to respond to the challenges that were measured in elements such as the Doing Business report. The youth and the skills that youth bring to the job market is the other part of that equation. And how the private sector are able to absorb and encourage better youth employability is the challenge that we have in front of us. For many years, the World Bank Group and other international organizations and governments focused on education as though it were a problem of government, as though it were the responsibility of government and government alone to rise to the challenge of education. We now know that that is the wrong way of looking at things. The private sector does not just need to have a seat at the table, but needs to have the most important seat at the table. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, is a mind shift that we need to absorb and embrace in Saudi Arabia and in the region and in the world. The world is facing a youth employability challenge. And this is a global crisis. The ILO came out with a report saying that we are facing the possibility of a lost generation. And that is true the world over, but also in this part of the world and in Saudi Arabia. And I commend His Excellency for taking that problem by the horns and dealing with it. To answer your question again a little bit directly, when we created, the World Bank Group took a study about 3 years ago in which we studied 9 countries, including Saudi Arabia, and we asked employers, what is it that you are facing in terms of your new hires? Mm-hmm. And the response was invariably, we're not finding the skills we need, and not just the technical skills, but the soft skills. And that's something that we need to also address in our discussion today. So what do we mean by the soft skills? So yes, the language skills, the ability to work in teams, the critical thinking skills, the ability to engage in technology, the ability to understand other cultures beyond their own. All of these soft skills were lacking in the school systems.
So education and training centers.
The school systems were basically turning out a flow of youth, creating a stock of youth who are incapable of meeting the demands of the job market. So the employers need to not just complain. They need to go to the education providers, sit on the boards, be part of the governance structures, advise on the development of curriculums, and have a continuous feedback loop into what is being taught, not just at the university level, but even more importantly, at the technical and vocational level, because that's where the engine of growth lies.
Philip Andrew and Douglas Becker are partners with the Ministry of Labor, and we've been working extensively on certain programs to fill in the gap in the labor market. I'm going to start with you, Douglas. How can we fill the gap between what's needed in the labor market and what has been taught at universities here in Saudi Arabia? How can we do that? And what's the framework we're talking about?
I think this is a great opportunity for Saudi Arabia because you have an enormous amount of young people, which earlier today there was a discussion that this could be an asset and not a liability. You have a government with the plans and the political will to execute those plans, and you have the resources to fund it. And this combination of the TVTC colleges that the government already operates and the new experiment with the internationally managed colleges of excellence, I think is really a model that's going to be studied by other countries around the world. I think it's very exciting, and I think it's going to produce results. But I think the results will come because of accountability. And when the minister mentioned earlier that it's so important to have specific criteria, and whether those criteria are based purely on the employability of the students or whether we can be more granular, to Dalia's point, to make sure that students are graduating with these specific skills. And I'll give you an example, because in our context, our company, we operate universities in 30 countries around the world. And this idea that the minister said earlier, he, as an employer, used to look not just at what university you went to, but where you used to work. So a great example would be the role of internships. So internships is something that everyone talks about. Many colleges do. Most do very poorly. Mm-hmm. And we've built a core competency around a model for structured and supervised internships so that when the student graduates, they already have a relationship with employers, and the person who hires them, if not the one in the internship, sees the internship as employment experience for the student. So this would be an example. I think the other thing that we have to recognize is that we have to motivate the students.
How can we do that?
And this is very difficult, and I think in Saudi Arabia in particular, where you have a large number of students entering the workforce, we hope, for the first time, we have to motivate the students. And I think part of this is something that can be done through public awareness. We need some of these technical jobs to be perceived as desirable for students. This can be done by providing information like employment, wages, things like that, but also through just glamorizing a little bit the importance of serving and supporting your country through productive work. I think this would be well received. Families can play a huge role. We know that families are close in Saudi Arabia. I think the role of parents, and in particular the role of mothers, to encourage their sons and daughters to work could be fantastic. And I think certainly we recognize as operators of educational institutions, we need to motivate students. And my last point on this would be that while we're very focused on vocational education in Saudi Arabia, the desire to have an advanced degree, even though we realize that maybe not everyone needs a university degree, it is still an aspiration. And so even if only 1 out of 4 students who go to a vocational school might one day need a full degree, this pathway needs to be made available because it gives them the incentive to dream and maybe to enter the college and the workforce.
I mean, here the question comes for Philip. Do we need all Saudi youth to have a degree? How flexible should a labor market should be? We need plumbers, we need electricians, and it would be lovely to have them Saudis.
Absolutely.
And I mean, you go on. This is your
It's an incredibly important point. Let's just think about Working Link's background. It was set up as a governmental and charity and private sector organization, primarily to help those who are the very furthest from employment. We're talking about ex-offenders, those with disabilities, mental health problems, literacy and numeracy difficulties. And where we find the most success is where we have absolute flexibility. In conjunction with our partners, Elm, here in the Kingdom, we run 7 centres under the TACAP programme, 4 female and 3 male. And we find that one of the difficulties, and I have to be honest here and say, particularly with the male customers who come through the door, is that they have both a sense of entitlement and a very clear idea on what they want to be. And generally speaking, when you say to somebody, what do you want to be? They say, I want to be a manager in government. That's great, but everybody can't be a manager in government. I have to say, from a female perspective, we do not have these difficulties. There's a much greater level.
So women are always more flexible.
Well, I have to say that let me tell you a little anecdote here. In our Riyadh office, we have a female office and a male office. And I asked the head of the male office what he does for a job, and he said, I get people into work. We asked for permission of the guardians, and I went upstairs and I said to the head of the female establishment, what do you do? And she said, I'm here to make Saudi Arabia a better place. And that's the difference. We've got a lot of flexibility amongst the female workforce, and they're just very, very good at doing that. And what the females actually do in the Riyadh office is that they have a bell, and they're upstairs, and every time they get a female into work, they ring a bell and they stamp on the floor so the men can hear it. And it's outstanding motivation.
So here we go. Women might rule one day.
So in essence, what I'm saying here is that really, in order for a nation to become prosperous, it needs to bring everybody with it, not just the top 5% of high potential graduates, but it needs to bring everybody with it, because with bringing everybody along, it creates tolerance, it creates prosperity, and then you go from strength to strength.
Very good. Ali, you're been overlooking LinkedIn in the MENA. How has your experience been so far in Saudi Arabia with the different profiles you have online?
Sure.
So data has transformed, or the availability of data has transformed the way we think, and accordingly we take decisions. As you probably know, LinkedIn is the world's largest professional network with over 259 million members worldwide. In Middle East, North Africa, we've crossed the 10 million members, and in the kingdom here, we've over 1 million members as of last year.
So 1 out of 4 million is from Saudi?
1 million out of 10 million in
Out of 10 million?
12 countries.
10%.
Yeah. And LinkedIn can help actually in 3 different ways. One, we work with our members, and these members can be our students, our fresh graduates, or professionals, to define a professional identity on LinkedIn. And by doing so, they can connect with over 259 million members, reach out for guidance and support. But also there's over 3 million company pages on LinkedIn. Some of the biggest names here in Saudi Arabia, the like of Zain, STC, Al-Marahi, and others. And there's over 2.1 million groups, where these groups, where like-minded professionals can also collaborate together. And then we can work with corporates by helping them having a corporate identity on LinkedIn. They post their jobs and they reach out for this talent. And the last point is working with the universities, which is the key. So we have launched last year what we call the alumni pages. And I'm very happy to mention that the majority of the alumni pages that we have in Middle East, North Africa are here based in Saudi Arabia, the like of King Abdulaziz University and King Saud universities. And actually these alumni pages act like a foundation or a collaboration place between graduates, students, and teachers. So let's take an example. Let's say I'm studying in King Abdulaziz University. And I can go to the alumni pages and I can go and see who graduated from that university and reach out for guidance or support. As a matter of fact, and that's something I faced personally 18 years back, where all this data was not available. I started studying as law. I started in law and then moved after 2 semesters to pharmacy and then to engineering, and here I am today working in social media. So I've wasted some time, effort, and energy, whereas today students can go to these alumni pages and they can just check if I want to have a major in engineering versus finance. What are the most probable jobs that I'm gonna be getting, and then get to take an informative decision. By doing so, LinkedIn ultimate objective is to create the first economic graph or the first economic map, which from one side you will be able to see the skills required in each and every country, and from the other side you can see the talent available. By measuring these 2 different factors, you will be able to identify the skill gaps. And eventually, once you reduce that skill gap, you will push for economic growth.
Okay. I'm going to go back to the same subject, engagement employee, or employee engagement. You've mentioned that females have more potential to be more engaged, and they see it as a purpose rather than the other side of the story. I don't want anybody to hate me, but I'm going to throw this question to the Minister of Labor. There's this study called Qudarat, conducted by recruitment specialists in the GCC called Ain Hewitt. And they said that Saudi nationals are the least engaged at 40.6% at work. My question comes, and I said, I'm just trying to challenge ideas and nothing else, really. It's just to make Saudi a better place. Is there a law that would allow the employer to fire a Saudi and say, you have not done the job right, I cannot take you into perspective, I want another Saudi who can do the job? What is the legal framework that can actually make everybody feel responsible, and that the job market is a serious place to work and not just to take advantage of the government wanting to nationalize a place? I'm sorry. Don't hate me for this, but you know.
Well, actually, the current labor law empowers employers with the authority and the capacity to fire employees, albeit with certain conditions. That is, that they would have not to surprise employees one morning after a very long period of good quality employment record by standing one day in the morning and saying you're fired without any notice. But if those who are doing business in Saudi Arabia do fire people. The process is a little bit complex in the sense that it requires 3 warning letters to be sent to the employee and stating why the employee has failed to perform. And after the 3rd warning letter, the employer can fire without, of course, there are as well contracts, arrangements that gives the employer the flexibility to engage and to employ employees only for a closed period contract, not an open period contract, for the first year and the second year before they go into the open-ended contracts arrangement, which normally makes it more difficult to fire. But besides all of this current flexibility, the new amendments that are being reviewed by the Majlis al-Shura currently has called for further empowerment for the employer to be able to manage their workforce with more flexibility. And we are waiting for the review of the Shura Council that we would expect to empower employers with more flexibility in managing employees that are of not the standard that is required by the employment contract. So what I'm trying to say in summary, I subscribe to the school of thought that says yes, employees should not be given the opportunity to continue working substandard, and employers do not have the
skills needed,
the authority and capacity to fire them. We believe that the fact that we have launched currently the unemployment insurance scheme, unemployment insurance law has been passed a few weeks ago, which actually makes the employees who makes unemployment insurance mandatory, and it means that when an employee gets fired, at least for a year, he will get unemployment insurance benefit until he or she finds another job. That should make it easier for our legislators in the Shura Council to make tougher conditions, and that was designed so that the decisions that has to do with giving more flexibility to the employers are done after the unemployment insurance has passed, and which really makes a reasonable balance in the situation between both the employer's rights and the employee's rights too.
Doug, is the education system right now doing the right thing? And if you give me or throw a number of years, where would you see that actually the curriculum now is fit enough to prepare potential students ready for the job markets?
When would it be ready, do you think?
A number. How is the current situation, and where do you see it changing dramatically?
I think the current situation is in the process of invention. This is an explosion of the moment. There's almost no other country in the world that's going through this much change with this much serious purpose and this much resource. So I should also tell you, many countries are very dissatisfied with their technical education experiences. So it should not be that Saudi Arabia would feel alone in wishing to invent or reinvent its system. In the US, there's a tremendous amount of criticism for our technical vocational system. In Europe, where youth unemployment has skyrocketed, there are real questions about whether the systems are meeting the needs. So at Laureate, this is something that we study very, very carefully. And I think that it will take some time. But I really do believe that Saudi Arabia is on the right track. I think your point earlier about the ability for an employer to motivate or to make a change is, and really that's the linkage. You're not looking to fire, you're looking to concentrate the mind.
And to motivate.
Right, and so earlier when I said, are there other ways to motivate? Certainly knowing that you have to deliver. It's no different when the minister mentioned that the contracts that are being issued have incentives associated with outcomes. Employees need those same incentives, whether it's future employment, respect of their peers, feeling the equal of the people stomping their feet in the floor above you. These are all forms of motivation, and it's something not to forget. This is a human experience. There is one area that I think Saudi Arabia could benefit from, and that is the very careful experimentation with the use of online instruction. not as a large part of the instruction, especially when you're dealing with hands-on technical skills, but there are very specific skills that can be taught well with online instruction. And this is something, it's one of the things that I've noted that seems not to really have arrived as much in Saudi Arabia as we've seen in other countries. Other countries have experimented, they've seen how it can work, and they've seen where it fails. And it's an area where we've developed a lot of experience in what works and what doesn't. Because why is this important? The education can't stop when the student has graduated and goes to work, because their skills begin to come out of date and the jobs change. So online education is a very flexible and cost-effective way to allow students to continue their skill development. And for the rest of the world, which is not gifted with such youth as you have, they depend on the working adult population. They need to become educated, but they have families and they don't have time. And so you need a flexible method. And I have to tell you, I think the strides that have been made in online are enormous. And it's so fascinating to see the enormous adoption of a social media technology like LinkedIn. And yet the corollary to that is this is how people communicate. It's becoming how people learn. So I hope this might be an area for a pilot study or demonstration project.
Dalia, there are so many stakeholders involved in this subject. Everybody has a responsibility so far with a certain percentage. Obviously, you've said that private sector should take the lead. If there's one thing that worries you about the current situation in terms of the job situation in the region, what would it be, and what do you think should be done?
One thing that worries me, that's a tough question. I think in the region there are obviously a number of challenges. As we said before, there's a systemic problem in this region. And the systemic problem is that the education system at all levels has failed to generate youth who are capable of taking up jobs in the marketplace. So if you're dealing with a system that is broken, you need to be able to go in and fix it immediately. Now in Saudi Arabia, you have the resources and the capacity and the will, the government will, which is very important to make that change. And so if I had to put my finger on one thing that is really important to bring about change, I would say it's government will. And therefore, if we could think about that in all of the countries of the region, I think that you will begin to see where the keys to unlocking the problem lie. And I just want to go back to a point that was made. Your question, what you thought was a challenging question to His Excellency, I would just want to come and to say further that this is not just an issue that is faced here, this is an issue that is faced in all of the GCC as it begins to nationalize. And beyond that, it's faced in the region. You know, if you ask youth, where would you like to work? If you asked youth in Egypt, for example, their first choice would be a government job. And that is the sense of, I get a job, I get a paycheck, I'm comfortable, I'm entitled, I don't have to work very hard, I can go and drive a taxi in the evening if I want to, and that's the way the job market has been structured. So shaking that sense of entitlement or comfort zone is very important. When you look at...
Do you think it's going to be easy?
No, I don't think it's going to be easy. I mean, labor participation rates in the region here are at 31% on average. You said 26% here. On average in the region, it's 31% for youth between the ages of 16 to 29. Globally, labor participation rates for youth is at 52%. Yet, this region has one of the highest unemployment rates for its youth. So there is an issue there. It's not just the matter of skills. There is that sense of entitlement. And there is that sense of what we call in the World Bank a reserve wage. Reserve wage meaning youth are not willing to go to work as plumbers or as carpenters or as what, because they perceive that they should be engineers or doctors, and their families are supporting that kind of behavior. Yeah. So the reserve wage concept is making for a lot of this youth employability challenge.
Philip, you have a tough job, truly. With 7 centers, you said, 4 female. Do you think you're going to do some big changes in Saudi Arabia with the culture that we have in the region? It's not only a Saudi story, actually. It's a MENA story. I come from Morocco, and my father would only be proud if he saw me an engineer, a doctor, or a banker. I ended up being a banker, and then I completely rebelled against him, and I went into media 6 years ago. He's okay with me, but it's something that we all face.
It is a huge challenge across the whole region. I mean, one thing I would say is it's going back to the flexibility point. It's incumbent also upon employers, and many of you put your hands up as employers, and your flexibility and your risk appetite is incredibly important. If I look at some of the requirements that you as employers put out in terms of who we can send for interview, I can tell you that neither Richard Branson nor Bill Gates would get to first interview with many of you, because you require people who've done extremely well at university every time. The difficulty we have with that is that overall, some people are different. And I give you the challenge to say, don't think that if you hire somebody and it fails, that that's a failure every time. If you're going to pick up a diverse range of people through your hiring policy, sometimes you are going to fail, and it's okay. It's okay to fail sometimes when you're hiring if you're going to do that. And what I always say to employers is that if you look at some of these people who've had a really, really tough journey through life, just think to yourself, where would I be today if I'd started where they are now? Sometimes take a risk. If you take a risk, we get society wider and higher up as a whole, and as I say, then the nation takes off. And I'd say, just as a last point, one of the measures of success for Saudi Arabia is not going to be in the petroleum or the high-tech sector. I think a measure of success is in 10 years' time, how many Saudi nationals are working as housekeepers in hotels and in KFC, because then you'll know the nation is normalizing.
Okay. Ali, I'm going to ask you a question, nothing to do with your current job. You've actually been very much experimental. You've taken risks throughout your career, and you just mentioned it yourself. If there was one advice you would probably give to young people out there, Saudi young people, of trying different things until you probably find the right job that inspires you, and you probably would do it with passion.
Well, I would say two things. One is there's a lot of data available for you. You can have a profile on LinkedIn as students. As recent as last year, we've decreased the average age of joining LinkedIn here in the kingdom from 18 years to 13 years old in order to help them start paving their way. But also follow your passion. So I'm reading a book called Conscious Business, written by an author called Fred Kaufman. And he gives a very good example about this. He says, if you ask anyone, what's your job? Usually people gives you their titles. I'm a manager, I'm a banker, but this is not really your job. Your job is to make the vision of your organization successful. If you ask Maradona, for example, we all know who Maradona is, what's your job? He's not gonna tell you, I'm always there to score or to be a midfielder. If his team, for example, is winning 1-0 and there's still 5 minutes to go, his job is to go back and defend. So the job of every student should be where his passion is and where he can align his passion along with the vision of the organization he wants to work for.
Mr. Faqih, you've been in this job for the last 2 years, and I think you've done well so far. Nitaqat has worked quite efficiently. Yes, it upsets some people in the private sector, but they're getting used to the new cost strategy. What's next? What's coming? What are your numbers? What are your targets? Where do you see the Saudi labor market in 5 years' time?
Actually, I've been in job more than 3 years now, so...
2.5 maybe.
Okay. Our key interventions were launched slightly more than 2.5 years, and we have a series of other interventions that have been launched since then, and we'll continue launching them. But I think what my colleagues and I would like to focus on during 2014 is on improving the supply. The point that the employers are rightfully worried about in terms of having quality job seekers with the right skills and with the right preparation. That's an area that we think that we have started working on, but we have not worked on enough. And I believe that there are a few other interventions that we can start activating that would help provide the market help the educational institutes produce outcomes that will suit the employers and interventions in terms of improving the supply side to the market. We've been busy with the demand so far, but we want to work a little bit more on the supply.
You're optimistic?
Very much optimistic, yes.
We're going to see Saudi women in the airport soon?
Well, you see, Saudi women are invited to work in all variety of walks of environments. There are certain conditions that we want to always ensure so that there is a decent environment in which our women are respected and given the right environment to respect their customs and religion. But there is nothing in the law that says women cannot work in any location or in any profession.
It's half of the population, so we can't ignore them. They're important. We're going to open the floors for some Q&As. Let's start with, I can't see the number, but number 6 to be given to, you have the, just.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله
وعليكم
وبركاته.
السلام.
علي الفقيه بالألف لام يعني. شكرا جزيلا لمعالي الوزير على طرح الأفكار، وإحنا نثني على كل البرامج اللي قدمت. ولكن ألا تعتقد معي أن المشكلة تتعلق بذهنية أو عقلية الشاب السعودي؟ سواء نتفق مع البحث اللي تحدثت عنه مقدمة الجلسة اللي تحدث عن level of engagement of Saudi people، أختلف أو أتفق معه أيا كان. ألا تعتقد أن المسألة تتعلق بحجم المعلومات التي تعطى للشاب أو الشابة السعودية في مراحل التعليم ذات العلاقة بالعمل؟ يعني يصرف جل الوقت للطلاب السعوديين والسعوديات في الجامعات أو في مراحل التعليم وهم بعيدين كل البعد عن عالم الأعمال، وبالتالي فاقد الشيء لا يعطيه. عندما ينطلقوا بعد ما يتخرجوا إلى عالم الأعمال فعلا هم lack of employability skills، مش لأنهم فقط كسولين وغير راقبين في العمل، لا، لأنه هو لم يتحدث معه أي شخص في مراحل التعليم المختلفة عن مستقبله المهني. حتى الحديث عندما تحدث المتحدث تسأل عن مهنتك أو وظيفتك أو عملك، لا يستطيع أن يميز بين البيسك ثينجز هذه الأساسية. تجربتكم في كليات التميز أتمنى ألا تتكرر، بحيث أنه يتم التركيز على تغيير ذهنية الشباب والشابات السعوديات على الاهتمام بعالم الأعمال، اللي أقصد فيها الكارير كونسلينج والكارير جايدنس، حتى يقدروا ما هو مفهوم العمل وماذا يعني مستقبلهم المهني.
الفكرة وصلت عشان نقدر ناخذ كمان كذا سؤال من الأودينس بشكل سريع. معالي الوزير،
بشكل سريع أنا أتفق أن هناك فرص لتحسين وتطوير واستكمال وإضافة وتعديل برامجنا في التعليمية في جميع المستويات، وهذه مراجعة مستمرة نحن مسؤولون عنها ومسؤولة عنها الحكومة في مواقعها المختلفة، وأنا أعرف أن زملائي في التربية والتعليم وفي التعليم العالي يقوموا بذلك، ونحن نقوم بذلك في التدريب التقني والمهني، وبالنسبة كذلك لبرامج التوجيه والإرشاد المهني أو ما يسمى الكارير إديوكيشن، فعندنا مبادرة سيتم إطلاقها في خلال الشهور القليلة القادمة لتبني وتدعيم الإرشاد والتوجيه المهني سواء كان في مراحل التعليم الأولية أو في مراحل التعليم المتقدمة.
Number 3.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. My name is Ghassan Al-Suleiman and my question is to Dalia. You mentioned earlier that the private sector should have not only a seat on the table, but the most important seat on the table. In an earlier session, one of the panelists said there was an issue of trust between the private sector and the public sector. And you know, when you mentioned your statement, I wanted to stand up and clap. And this is really very frustrating. I'll clap now. But anyway, this is really very frustrating for us in the business and the private sector. And I wanted to see, you know, in other countries, how were they able to bridge that gap? How did the private sector get the most important seat in the table?
Dalia.
Good question, many ways. I had begun to allude to some of it when I made the point earlier. So, as I said, the private sector are the employers, but private sector are also education providers. I'll give the example of some countries in Latin America. In Brazil, and in Chile and in Colombia, 15, 20 years ago, the majority of post-secondary education, even technical vocational training, was provided by public sector education providers. And they were catering to public sector mentalities in those job markets. Curriculums were set by central ministries and secretariats, very difficult to change to the needs of the job markets. That was the reality 20 years ago. Today, if you go to Brazil, 75% of all post-secondary education and technical vocational training is provided by privately owned education institutions. The same is happening in Malaysia and in Indonesia. It's now exceeded 50%. It's the same as happening in Turkey. This region of the world lags behind. The GCC is slightly different in that a lot of the education is already being provided by private entities, but mostly catering to elite segments of society. And therefore, that's where the shift has to be. The private sector needs to move in and recognize that this is a lucrative business, that it is a business that can cater to the public good. And then when you start running education as a business, you begin to want to make sure that the people who are graduating from your facilities find jobs, because that's how you're going to make sure that you have more people coming through your doors and going to your facilities. Now, of course, you are sort of compounding the problem a little bit when you are providing for the training of these people, but at least you are asking people to vote with their feet. Because youth, as they come into these education facilities, will know that they are going to they're going to find jobs when they graduate because they've made the choice based on market needs. And that gets to another point that was made loosely in a previous comment about information. When people make decisions based on the information that they have, if they don't have the right information on wage rates, on who's providing what kind of education, what is the lag between education and employment, then they're not able to make the right choices. Information is very important. Private provision of education and training is very important.
Okay.
And that's something that the IFC and the World Bank is working very hard to
wrap up,
facilitate.
number 3, final questions, and number 6, final question then. And we're done.
Assalamu alaikum. Abdulaziz Al-Babtin, HEMA Projects. Your Excellency, allow me to look to the problem from different perspective. We are focusing now about how can we replace the Saudis with the existing business opportunity. I think in Saudi Arabia we have huge potential to create a lot of investment opportunity which will create more sustainable jobs. When we have the sustainable jobs, Saudi male and female, they will be ready to get the training and grab to that business opportunity. We noticed how in Jubail and Yanbu they work late, and also what we notice in the private sector that the government as a total, we appreciate what you are doing in Ministry of Labor, but the government in totality, they need to do good infrastructure in the less developed region, and also soft infrastructure like regulatory and framework. For example, franchising is one of the main tools to create jobs for SMEs. Until now, we are waiting for a franchising law. So I think the government as a total, they have to tackle job creation, not only the private sector alone and the Ministry of Labor. We need private sector and the public sector in totality. Thank you.
You're taking brief?
I agree, actually, I agree. I agree. We are working on the short-term aspects with low-hanging fruits. We could not continue just issuing millions of work permits and visas for foreign workers where we have and substitute them with more foreign workers without giving our youth the opportunity to take a share of that. But the medium and long-term solution is not about substitution, it's about creating and stimulating the generation of decent quality jobs through entrepreneurship and through stimulating the economy to produce the right quality jobs in the future.
Unfortunately, we need to wrap up this session because the next session has been waiting for the last 10 minutes. I would like to thank you, Your Excellency, the Minister of Labor from Saudi Arabia, Adil Faqih. I would like to thank Dalia Al-Khalifa, Dr. Dalia Khalifa, Regional Head E4E Initiative for Arab Youth, part of the World Bank. I would like to thank also Philip Andrew, who is the Group Chief Executive of Working Links. Douglas Becker, founder and chairman and CEO of Laureate Education, and Ali Matar, head of LinkedIn MENA. Thank you, dear, for being very attentive, and we'll see you next session. Thank you.